It started as an ordinary afternoon in a quiet neighborhood near the Mexican border. 8-year-old Sofia was playing in her front yard, her loyal German shepherd, Max, by her side. Max wasn't just any dog. He was a retired war hero, trained for high-stakes missions. But to Sofia, he was simply her best friend. As laughter filled the air, no one could have imagined the danger that was about to strike. A black SUV rolled up the street, its tinted windows hiding the men inside. They had no idea who they were about to cross. The cartel had chosen this home, thinking it was an easy target. But when chaos erupted, they quickly learned they had underestimated Max. As Sofia's screams echoed, Max leaped into action, his instincts honed by years of training. What happened next would leave everyone stunned. The sound of the SUV's doors slamming open sent chills through the air. 2 men stepped out, their faces masked and their movements deliberate. Sofia froze, clutching Max's fur as fear crept into her tiny chest. She didn't understand who these men were or why they had come, but Max knew. His ears perked, muscles tensed, and a low growl rumbled deep in his throat. Inside the house, Sofia's mother, Elena, sensed something was wrong. She peeked through the curtain and gasped, her heart racing as she dialed for help. The men began walking towards Sofia, speaking in low, threatening voices. One of them carried a small bag. What was inside remained a mystery. But Max didn't wait for answers. With lightning speed, he stepped forward, placing himself between Sofia and the danger. The men paused, realizing too late that this wasn't an ordinary dog standing in their way. Ned, and changed their lives forever. The sound of the SUV's doors slamming open sent chills through the air. 2 men stepped out, their faces masked and their movements deliberate. Sofia froze, clutching Max's fur as fear crept into her tiny chest. She didn't understand who these men were or why they had come, but Max knew. His ears perked, muscles tensed, and a low growl rumbled deep in his throat. Inside the house, Sofia's mother, Elena, sensed something was wrong. She peeked through the curtain and gasped, her heart racing as she dialed for help. The men began walking towards Sofia, speaking in low, threatening voices. One of them carried a small bag. What was inside remained a mystery. But Max didn't wait for answers. With lightning speed, he stepped forward, placing himself between Sofia and the danger. The men paused, realizing too late that this wasn't an ordinary dog standing in their way. Max stood firm, his sharp gaze locked on the intruders. One of the men chuckled, dismissing the dog as just another obstacle, but the other hesitated, noticing something unusual in Max's stance. This wasn't the behavior of a typical family pet. The dog's movements were calculated, his growls deep and measured, like he was ready for battle. Meanwhile, inside the house, Elena kept her eyes on Sofia through the window, her heart pounding with fear and anger. She whispered hurried prayers while gripping her phone, pleading for the police to arrive quickly, but she knew time wasn't on their side. The men, unaware of Max's military past, tried to push forward. One reached into his jacket, pulling out a taser, thinking it would scare the dog away. But before he could act, Max lunged, his powerful bark echoing like a warning shot. The men stumbled back, suddenly realizing they'd made a grave mistake. Max's bark seemed to shake the air, freezing the men in their tracks. The one with the taser hesitated, his hand trembling as he tried to figure out his next move. The other man, more brazen, reached for something in his pocket, but Max didn't wait. He charged forward with lightning speed, his sheer presence enough to send panic through the intruders. Sofia stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes as she watched Max protect her. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like they were glued to the ground. From inside the house, Elena banged on the window, yelling for Sofia to come inside, her voice cracking with desperation. The men backed toward that SUV, realizing they'd miscalculated. But just as one of them climbed into the driver's seat, the sound of distant sirens pierced the air. They were running out of time, but so was Max. The men weren't leaving without a fight. As the sirens grew louder, The men exchanged panicked glances. Just when it seemed they might flee, the passenger door of the SUV opened again, and a third man stepped out. He was older, with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. He didn't speak but surveyed the scene, locking his gaze on Max. This man was different. He didn't underestimate the dog. You could see Max wasn't just a protector, he was a weapon. Max's growl deepened, and his body crouched slightly, ready to spring if needed. The older man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, clicking it open to reveal a high-pitched whistle. The sound was barely audible to human ears, but Max's reaction was immediate. His ears twitched, his movements faltered, and for a split second he looked confused. Inside, Elena gasped. Whatever the man had, it wasn't random. It was designed to target Max. Sophia, still frozen, didn't understand why her brave companion suddenly seemed vulnerable. The men moved closer again, emboldened by Max's hesitation. But as they approached, something shifted in Max's eyes, as if he was fighting against the invisible force. He wasn't giving up, not yet. Max shook his head, his instincts battling against the high-pitched sound that was meant to disorient him. The older man smirked, thinking the dog was neutralized. He signaled for the others to grab Sophia. One of the men reached out, but before his hand could touch her, Max snapped out of his daze. With a fierce bark, he lunged forward, his jaws locking onto the man's arm. The man screamed in pain, dropping to his knees as Max held firm. The older man, furious, reached for something in his jacket. But before he could act, the sirens blared right outside the house. Police cars surrounded the scene, red and blue lights flashing. Officers stormed out, shouting commands as the men scrambled to retreat. Just when it seemed over, the older man pulled out a smoke grenade, tossing it to create chaos. He darted for the SUV, but Max wasn't done. Leaping through the smoke, he knocked the man to the ground, pinning him until officers arrived to cuff him. As the dust settled, Sophia hugged Max tightly, tears streaming down her face. The officers praised the dog's bravery, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling there was more to these men than a random attack. Later, they discovered the men were part of a cartel that had been targeting homes linked to military personnel. What they didn't count on was a retired war dog who wasn't ready to quit fighting. In the days that followed, the house returned to an uneasy calm. The cartel members were in custody, and the police assured Elena they would do everything to keep her family safe. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about how close they had come to losing everything. Sophia, too young to fully understand the danger, only saw Max as her hero. To her, he was invincible, and in many ways, she was right. Max became the talk of the town, hailed as a local hero for his bravery. But for Elena, he was more than that. He was a guardian, a reminder of the sacrifices made by those who serve, even after their service ends. That night, as Sophia drifted to sleep with Max curled up beside her, Elena whispered a quiet thank you. For Max, the mission might have been over, but his watch over his family would never end.